I've been meaning to talk about this for a while, but it needs to be said that sport martial arts, the combat sports, serve an incredibly important role, both just in general to human life, and also to the martial arts, the skills themselves. So a lot of people on the self defense and real world street fighting side of things think that sport martial arts are too limiting because there's too many rules and blah, 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 blah. We've all heard that. And then, of course, there are definitely way too many sport guys who think that if you haven't seen it in sport, it doesn't work. And therefore, anything that's not sport oriented is garbage, which is also clearly not true. However, let's put things in their place where they belong. And the fact is, and we've kind of briefly touched on these before, is that people used to fight a lot more. People used to grow up fighting. People used to be plagued by banditry and piracy. People used to just get into fights a lot more because cultures tended at one point to be more honor style cultures where you personally defend your honor versus what's the term now? I don't remember, but the dignity cultures, which use the legal systems instead of personal self-defense, which both have their pluses and minuses. But the fact is that we used to spend a lot more time fighting than we do. And there was a great quote, and I really believe it was Mark McYoung that said it on a Facebook post. And he said that back in the day when they would go learn martial arts, it wasn't because they didn't know how to fight. It's because they were trying to get an edge. They were trying to be able to fight better, right? Learning martial arts was about taking that raw talent that you already had and putting an edge on it, making it something that was sharper and better. And the implication there was you already knew how to fight. You didn't need to spend a lot of time practicing fighting because you already had experience and you were likely to continue accumulating experience, which is part of why a lot of early styles don't necessarily call for a lot of free sparring, because free sparring wasn't expressly necessary if you were just going out and getting in fights all the time. When you look at it from that side, culture has changed and there's a lot less of that going on now, which means that there's a lot less opportunity for people to walk into a martial arts class with previous fighting experience. There's a lot less opportunity for people to develop fighting experience outside of class, which means that your martial arts classes now have to do something that they were not originally intended to do, which is teach you how to fight from the ground up without that extra bit on top of it. And that means that has to be baked into the curriculum, which means a lot more regular sparring and other free play sparring style drills, because not everything needs to be 100% free sparring, but you need stuff where you have to make a read, make a decision, and then carry out an action, and then kind of basically run your diagnostics on, were you successful, did you fail, what could you do better? And doing stuff that forces the read and decision making, basically building your fight IQ, that stuff is absolutely integral. And that's not to say they didn't do that back in the day. What I'm getting at is that because fighting was more common, you could spend more time on the attributes and the technique because that was what was more necessary. Today, attributes and technique are easy to build, and we need to build the fight IQ as well. Now, the other thing, and this is another major part that sport kind of fills in with, is the fact that sparring is quite often not enough. For some people, they're competing is not on the table due to whatever kind of health and legal reasons and all of that. But sparring may not expressly be enough, and that means that you need a chance to go hard with people who don't know you, don't necessarily care about you, and are willing to inflict bodily harm on you. Which is obviously a dangerous position to put yourself in, and certainly not everybody needs to do that. But I would say that a significant percentage of us involved in the martial arts need to be doing that because that's what keeps us honest. And so competition, the actual sport side of it, not just the sport training, but the actual sport competition side of it, actually gives an outlet that is, a reasonable enough proxy for a fight, that gives you some feedback in real time that is something other than just friendly sparring. And that's really important. All right. Hey, afterthought Solomon here, right? One of the things I wanted to mention, which I did not mention when I was recording earlier, it just slipped my mind, was the fact that, a while back on our Facebook group, I posted a little piece of commentary saying how we should kind of take a page out of the powerlifting handbook and have raw and equipped competitions. And of course, right, we already see that in jiu-jitsu with gi and no gi, or even just kind of more traditionally, because originally jiu-jitsu was all gi, and then there'd be wrestling, catch wrestling in specific. And that's fine. But the fact is that even a lot of the traditional martial arts and the striking styles that we come from, some of the techniques in, say, like karate and kung fu make more sense if you have some clothing or even perhaps some armor on, as opposed to being completely raw. So having raw and equipped competition is actually a pretty smart idea. And yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily walk around wearing these traditional outfits all the time. So it's not like it's going to be this one-to-one, self-defense, real-world violence kind of carryover. But just the idea of like, this is how you go body to body, raw, and this is how you go interfacing with, a wearable something, right? Armed conflict is kind of going to be a different thing, but, raw and equipped competition's not a bad idea. Let's try it out. And then there's one more thing, and this is just more of a cultural thing, and that's the fact that we are still walking around with caveman DNA, right? And our caveman DNA kind of likes to be antagonistic. We tend to be selfish and pig-headed and belligerent, and we often get mad, and it's easy for fights to start and blah, blah, blah. Right. And that the fact is that, not just martial arts training, but actual, sport training, sport competition gives us an outlet to bleed off that, right? Think of it as a pressure release valve on a boiler, right? It gives us a pressure release valve so that when we go about our regular lives in regular society, it's not quite so bad. Now, obviously, there are bad actors, there are bad faith actors in every field. And we see that all the time. I mean, how many professional fighters get arrested? I mean, some of that is because the same qualities that it takes to become a really top tier professional fighter are also the qualities that it takes to become, a top tier, asshole getting arrested. So, pluses and minuses, right? But the fact is that the sport serves a very, very important role. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, right? You pretty much got two options, right? You train and become a fighter, or you train with fighters, because fighters are the only people that actually kind of have tested and figured out what's working. And if they've done their due diligence, they can figure it out. Now, look, there are some fantastic coaches out there with very, very little actual personal fight experience. Like, say, the big ones that come to mind are, Angelo Dundee and Customato, who were both, fantastic boxing coaches who had basically no experience. But the thing is, they were students of the game, and they were training guys who were fighting. And so they were sitting there and analyzing stuff in real time. And that is the important part of it, right? And it wasn't just studying tape. They were actually applying these tactics to their fighters, so that they were using their fighters as kind of a proxy for themselves for learning and understanding this stuff. And that's an important distinction to make. Yes, you should be watching fights, but it's not the same thing as actually training fighters, analyzing, making adjustments, and going in with new tactics every fight. It's worlds apart. But the fact is that while combat sports are not at all the be-all and end-all of it, they are a reasonably safe, legal alternative to actually just going out and getting in fights. They help you accumulate experience, and they act as a wonderful pressure relief valve for the more antagonistic amongst us. And as long as you don't let that go to your head, as long as you don't let that give you this kind of superiority complex, it's a fantastic thing. So please understand that just because sports have rules, just because sports have conditions that are not going to exist in the real world, does not make them in any way, shape, or form lesser than or invalid. It's just a different arena. And the fact is that it still lets you kind of get the 80-20, Pareto principle, Pareto distribution of your skills, your kind of fundamentals of like movement, reading, deciding, acting in a simplified format. It lets you get that stuff kind of out and figured out. And that way, when you start getting into some of the stuff that's harder to compete with because of your risk factor or legality or whatever, you at least have a more educated stance to work that stuff from, as opposed to just doing the math, right? You got to think like physics. You have your theoretical physics, you have your experimental physics, and then you actually have like your applied sciences going out into the engineering and the actual field application. So that stuff is important, and a lot of stuff doesn't make it out of the theory stage because the experiments and the field application prove that there are variables that are just not accounted for in the math. So with that said, I will talk to you guys later, and that's all. Good journey. Hey, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, do all the other social media stuff. You can check out our other socials, as well as take a look at some of the merchandise that we have for offer in the links below. And if you happen to be in the Phoenix metro area, stop in, come in for a class, come in just to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Until next time, good journey.